Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, narcissistic relationships, antagonism, toxic stuff. Today we're going to talk about the trolley problem, but we're going to talk about what I'm terming the psychological trolley problem raised by narcissistic relationships. So let's take that on. Now, I know many of you have probably heard about the trolley problem or are familiar with the trolley problem, but in case not everyone is, let me just lay it out. Basically, the trolley problem is sort of a philosophical and ethical conundrum, a kind of a study of a moral dilemma. As originally laid out, there's a runaway trolley, and it will kill 5 people if it stays on its runaway course. But a bystander could sort of pull a lever and get the trolley to go down a different track, so it would kill only 1 person. The ethical conundrum is, what would you do? Do nothing and then let it kill the 5 people, which it was going to do? Or do you pull the handle that will turn the train onto the different track and kill only 1 person? Many ethicists, philosophers, and religious scholars have taken this on. And the problem then becomes more complicated as people break down, well, what if that 1 person is someone that I know? What if that 1 person has a family and the 5 people don't? When we assume that they are strangers, many will choose to intervene and have the 1 person die instead of the 5. It's an uncomfortable scenario, and it raises all kinds of moral dilemmas within us, which is why it sort of was developed to think about these things. So how does this relate to narcissistic relationships? I actually think thinking of a trolley problem situation can actually shine a light on the cultural aspects of narcissistic, antagonistic, toxic relationships and the decisions that people make within them. I was recently talking with someone who comes from a culture with lots of freedoms, and he held lots of privileges in that society. So for him, if someone was in a toxic relationship, it's a no-brainer. Just leave it. Why would someone stay in an awful relationship? He asked. He simply couldn't get his head around the cultural issues because he had never faced them. He was definitely he held a lot of power in society. He's like, if it's not working with me, for me, I'm getting out. Now, a focus of my work is working with folks from cultural and religious backgrounds or regions of the world where leaving or ending the relationship really isn't an option. To do so would result in ostracism, bringing shame on other family members, making it more difficult for those family members to live their lives comfortably, financial peril, and in some cases, even more severe abuse. But I have to say, it's the shame and the fear of shame that would be brought onto others and their family. That piece is what often held people back. I have talked with survivors who have said, I am willing to give up financial security for the rest of my days and comfort to be free of this emotional abuse, to be free of the hypocrisy, to be free of the entitlement, the manipulation, all of it. But within that person's cultural or other, whatever religious, whatever group they're in, they're ending a marriage, for example, or cutting off family members, would bring a huge shame upon the family as a whole, including family members who they did care about, who weren't toxic, and may even harm opportunities for younger family members within their culture, and that they felt like they couldn't do it to them. So what did they do? They sacrificed the 1 to save the 5. The 1 happens to be themselves. They'll sacrifice themselves to protect the reputation or even the so-called honor of the family or their family members. I've seen this story play out many times in the circles I grew up in. I grew up in a South Asian family where narcissistic abuse, I hate to say it, in a lot of the culture is somewhat normative. Patriarchy is everywhere, and shame is often used as a weapon. And when we look at earlier generations who had to tolerate these relationships where there was no such thing as domestic violence programs, there was no access to therapy, no way to get to it, no way to pay for it even if there was, and it would be shameful even if they did finally have the way to get to therapy. There was no support, no education, no information, and the ramifications of such shame on the family would be astronomical. Of course they stayed, and they endured the psychological hardship. In the West, the United States, Canada, Western Europe, we view one person sacrificing themselves for many as codependent or overly martyr-like. In many parts of the world, it might feel literally like a necessity. And frankly, there are many folks right here in the West, in the United States, in Western Europe, in New Zealand, in Australia, who face difficult decisions like this. Do I just put up and suck it up so I don't have to harm my kids with misguided custody decisions by clueless family courts? So I don't have to rattle my family's cage with this? So I don't throw lots of other people's lives off who didn't ask for this? I don't want to mess up my kids by not letting them see grandparents or aunts or uncles or cousins. People who are trying to make the decision for many, despite the harm it is doing to them as individuals. The challenge is that many cases of narcissistic abuse are a form of abuse that others don't see. The toxic and antagonistic folks are too smart. They know to be charming to everyone in public and cruel to partners and children behind closed doors. It makes it look even more shameful because people think, well, oh, what a great person, and can leave the people in these relationships more isolated and feeling that ending a relationship or distancing from a family will just upend the system too much. Because everyone else may think the narcissistic person is a good person and that the other person in the relationship who is struggling in the relationship is just being difficult or sensitive. So when people ask me, well, if it's so bad, why don't they leave? I'm reminded of the trolley problem. In this case, though, a person opting to turn the trolley down the rails toward themselves, taking the hits themselves, giving up the hope of a healthy relationship for themselves to protect others. Narcissistic relationships feel like a daily moral dilemma. Honestly, it's why so many people put so much effort in the therapeutic realm to give people the tools they need to stay but not lose themselves. That's what I try to do in supporting those who stay as much as those who leave. This moral dilemma is the truth for so many. So before you side-eye a person who stays in one of these relationships and wonder if they're codependent or just too sensitive or are foolish for staying, recognize that these decisions are far more complicated than anyone can know, and the many variables, culture, religion, money, society, children, and the potential harm and shame that can come down to others in their system mean that people who are in these relationships are living the damned trolley problem every day. Thanks again.